you know only 3% of births go to plan? That tiny number is why making a birth plan is one of the biggest mistakes a new parent can make. Now, as a mother who's been through it, as well as someone who spent 15 years advising the most successful companies globally, I know that the best plans are ones that are flexible, adaptable, and that actually plan for contingencies. That's why in this video, I'm going to introduce you to the birth map. I'm going to share my actual birth map, and then I'm going to compare it to what actually happened. So what's the difference? Think of a birth plan like a fixed itinerary. You have a destination, you know exactly when you're going to depart, how many stops you're going to make, and what time you're going to arrive exactly. So what happens if you hit a road closure or traffic or your car breaks down? Well, now you're stressed because things are not going to plan. A birth map, on the other hand, says, I have a destination and my only goal is to arrive safely. It doesn't matter if I get there in 5 hours or 10 hours. It doesn't really matter when I depart. I know that if I come into some trouble, I can always call a car mechanic to help me out. If there's a road closure, no worries. There's this alternate path that I can take. So a birth plan is rigid, while a birth map is really flexible. That's why the birth map is so important. It allows you to explore not just the best case scenario, but also the worst case scenario and other possible alternatives. And the best part about the birth map is actually the discussion you have with your healthcare provider and asking lots of questions. It's really impossible to think through every single scenario, but the idea is to have that conversation and get as much information and education, because that will build up your confidence when you're going into that day and help you be more open-minded to the possible scenarios. The way I structured my birth map was I first started with an overview of labor. Now, there are 3 stages of labor. Stage 1 is the dilation of the cervix, going from 0 to 10 centimeters. Stage 2 is pushing and birth. And stage 3 is the delivery of the placenta. So I laid out all these stages, and then I brainstormed and discussed the possible scenarios and variations that could happen within each stage. I also included some of my tools to help promote oxytocin and melatonin to relax so that labor can progress, and tools around pain management as well. I also included what is the role of my support partner, and really thought through this and discussed it with my support partner too, which is such a vital role in the actual birth. And lastly, I included a little bit about myself so that I could share it with the midwives and my OB. So for example, I respond really well to positive encouragement. I also prefer very clear and specific instructions when it comes to things like pushing. Other people might prefer to have less rigid instructions and more go with the flow. So it's really up to you. Stage 1, dilation of the cervix. So my best case scenario was that I would go into labor spontaneously at home, and I would labor at home until I was no longer comfortable using the tools available to me, and then head to the hospital. My worst case scenario was being induced in this phase. I wanted things to be as natural as possible. Tools I brainstormed, if it was spontaneous at home, things like the TENS machine. I was able to rent it from the hospital, using water, baths, showers, going for a walk, even doing stretching and yoga. Those were all tools available to me. And then going to hospital, I had different types of tools around pain medication, like gas and air, morphine injections, epidurals. Now, if I was induced, this is the point where I had a discussion with my OB to understand what actually happens and what the process is. Some of the biggest questions that I had throughout this process was, at what point can I get an epidural? How long does it take to get an epidural from the time that I request it? How does the dosage work? What happens if the baby is posterior in this state? If I was at home, I knew the role of my support partner would be to help me put on the TENS machine, record contractions in the app so I could pay attention to how frequent, consistent, and intense they were, as well as pack the car and drive me to the hospital. At the hospital, my support partner would share my birth map with the hospital and set up the room in a calming way. Stage 2 is pushing and birth. My best case scenario in this stage was to have a vaginal birth with minimal interventions. And my worst case scenario was very severe tearing. I had a great discussion with my OB on those possible paths and everything in between. And I asked a lot of questions. Some questions included, when do 3rd and 4th degree tears happen? How many have happened for you specifically, and why? At what point do you use common interventions like forceps, a vacuum, or episiotomy? When do emergency C-sections commonly happen? At what point do you know to call it for an emergency C-section? And can my partner attend if it does go down that path? Talking through those questions really allowed me to create and build out my map so that I could understand all the possible scenario and what to expect if it happened, and gave me a lot of assurance from my OB that we were following the process in her decision making I also thought about the role of my partner, which would be advocating for all my needs to the midwives and the OB if I did not feel comfortable, helping me with massage and breathing, helping me relax, as well as taking photos and videos so that I could remember the day because I did want my birth to be filmed. Stage 3 and the afterbirth was a very short conversation. I shared I was happy with Pitocin to deliver the placenta. I did not want to keep my placenta. I was happy for it to be discarded. I wanted maximum skin to skin and help with breastfeeding afterwards. And I also was happy for any medical routine examinations to happen for my baby. Truthfully, if you are going to a great hospital, they will follow a lot of the best practices, so you don't have to worry too much. Things like delayed cord clamping is quite standard these days. Now let's go through what actually happened in my birth and how it compared to my birth map. In stage 1, it wasn't the best case scenario, but it wasn't the worst case scenario, somewhere in between. I was on my path to get induced at 41 weeks because my baby was late. But fortunately, because I was already dilated 2 centimeters, I didn't have to go through with the full induction. Instead, I was scheduled to have my waters broken that would trigger labor. I did go into spontaneous labor at home, and I did leverage the tools that I had listed. The biggest one was the TENS machine. I really enjoyed that. It provided a lot of pain relief, and I did go to the hospital when I was no longer coping. Upon arrival, I was about 3 centimeters dilated. I used some pain management to get me through that night. I used gas and air. I also used a morphine injection, which is safe in early labor, and that was so helpful because it allowed me to sleep that night. The next morning, I was scheduled to have my waters broken, so we went ahead with that. At that point, I was 5 centimeters dilated, so I did decide to go through and get an epidural. Although my reaction to the epidural wasn't great, I got the shakes pretty bad, I felt quite nauseous, and I did vomit once. I knew whatever discomfort I was feeling, it probably was better than some of the pain that I would have experienced in active and transitional phase of stage 1. Stage 2, pushing and birth. So what happened was not my worst case scenario, but it was a close second. I did have an emergency C-section. So what happened was after the epidural, I made it to about 6 centimeters and my baby was distressed. Their heart rate kept dropping, went down to about 40 beats per minute, a total of 3 times with every contraction, at which point my OB made the decision to call it for a C-section. As we had discussed, was a possibility. And I was absolutely amazed at how quickly she got her incredible team together. Truly 15 minutes upon arrival to the surgery room, I was greeting my gorgeous, perfect baby boy. It was such a joyous moment for me. And although the C-section was not at all what I wanted, I have to say my birth was absolutely amazing. And I was so, so happy. What are my takeaways? I think it's fair to say that even if you have a birth map and you can think through all these different scenarios, it's still fair to feel a level of disappointment that your birth did not go the way that you wanted it to go. If that does happen, that was my scenario. Even though I was open-minded, it still did create disappointment for me. But my other learning is that even if your birth doesn't go to plan and it is not what you expected, it can still be the best day of your life. It can still be a wonderful, magical, incredible day. It was not at all what I wanted, but I loved it and I wouldn't have had it any other way. My baby arrived into the world safely, exactly as they wanted to. They actually had the umbilical cord wrapped around their neck, which was why they were distressed with contractions, and I was just overjoyed to meet my baby. I experienced no pain, but I could still feel that sensation of a baby emerging from my body, which was honestly an incredible experience. So I hope this video proves that even though birth might not go exactly as you want it to, there are so many beautiful paths to meeting your baby and they can all be wonderful even if they're not what you planned. I have no regrets about my birth, but I do have one big regret, which is that I focused too much on the birth and I did not focus enough on the newborn phase, postpartum, bringing baby home. That is why I created this video that goes through some of the biggest mistakes that we make, how to create your perfect dream village, how to properly prepare and survive the first 8 weeks with a newborn. So please feel free to check that out.